Today's episode of Lone Star Lawyers on the Varsity Podcast Network is brought to you by Varsity Search. Varsity Search builds great teams by connecting lawyers in Texas with career opportunities at small and boutique law firms. So if you're thinking of making a move or your law firm is looking to hire, please go to varsitysearch.com and book a time to visit right into my calendar. Varsity Search, building great teams. Hey everyone, Daniel Hare back with you on Lone Star Lawyers. I hope you and your family are both healthy and safe. Before we get started, I want to let you know about a few of the positions that we are currently searching for in Dallas. We're looking for both construction litigators and general commercial litigators. Also a corporate law attorney there as well, like a 2 to 3 year corporate lawyer. In Houston, high-end commercial litigators, and then also an estate planning lawyer, as well as a plaintiff's personal injury lawyer with maybe 4 to 6 years of experience. In Austin, looking for both a family law attorney and an estate planning attorney. And in San Antonio, looking for insurance coverage lawyers and also commercial litigators. So that's a big swath of the state and as well as practice areas. So if any of those may appeal to you, I will say the San Antonio, at least for sure the insurance coverage, maybe even commercial litigator, could potentially be remote. So if you're interested in staying where you are but still making a job change, then that could be an option for you as well, even if you don't want to move to San Antonio. Okay. Also, you voted and we listened. The next Movie Verdicts episode will feature the classic To Kill a Mockingbird. So thanks to everyone who voted. We will, I'm sure, get to the others that were in that poll sooner or later. But for now, watch out in your feed. Robert Callahan and I will get to Kill a Mockingbird next on our Movie Verdicts episodes. So stay tuned for that. All right, today we are in Houston, where our guest is Jovana Popovich. Jovana is a shareholder with the boutique firm Fizer Beck, where she focuses on estate planning, taxation, and probate administration. Jovana is board certified in estate planning and probate law and has authored and presented numerous publications and speeches. She is active in the real estate, probate, and trust sections of both the State Bar of Texas and Houston Bar Association, and is a fellow in the prestigious Texas Bar Foundation. All right, with that, let's hop into our conversation with Jovana Popovich on today's Monday Mentors episode of Lone Star Lawyers. All right, Jovana Popovich joins us right now. Jovana, thanks so much for taking the time.
My pleasure.
I'm excited to visit with you. And as we get started here, I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about your firm and your area of practice.
Sure. So I work at Fizer Beck, and we are an estate planning boutique, which means that we focus really primarily on estate planning and estate administration for high net worth individuals. And about 80% of what we do is estate planning and estate administration. But we also have a real estate group, a M&A type corporate practice, and a charitable group. So it's really a one-stop shop. Our real estate group does its own commercial transactions. Our corporate group does their own M&A type work, and the charitable group as well. But all of those practices really correlate nicely to estate planning. So if we have people that need to have a trust, purchase a house, or anything like that, we can do it all at once. And so I focus primarily on estate planning and estate administration. And about 50% of what I do is estate planning, and the other 50% is estate administration. Awesome,
yeah. And remind me, I think I noticed, but how did you get into that area? How did you get into estate planning, and did you come about it naturally, or were you always wanting to do that? Talk about that a little bit.
No, I fell into it. So what I knew in law school is that I didn't want to do litigation because I do not have the personality to do litigation, and I didn't want to do big law because it was not my cup of tea. So I knew I wanted to do a smaller practice, something that interacted with people. And so I went into law school thinking I was going to do family law. And I kind of quickly realized I didn't want to do family law because it has more of a litigation perspective. And sure. I had a friend of a friend who did estate planning. And so she took me out to coffee and we chatted, and she's like, oh, I want you to meet my boss. And so I met, his name is Steve Saunders. He's an estate planning attorney in Austin, my first year in law school. And he liked me, and he's like, how about you be my research assistant? If we need legal research, we'll just reach out to you on a contract basis. And I said, hey, that's great. So I got the ability to sort of see it firsthand. I took the estate planning courses at the University of Texas, liked it, and ended up getting a job as a summer at Fizer Beck. And then that kind of is where my career took me.
That's great. Well, and I love hearing stories like that, because so often it is some of those relationship driven pieces that take you in a certain direction, and good for you for connecting those things together, and it worked out. And sounds like, well, and as it pertains to estate planning, are there things that just in recent months or years are impacting that practice area? I'm thinking either things at the state legislature or things with federal tax code. Mm-hmm. We'll obviously get to COVID in a minute, but kind of setting that aside, what's going on in the area of estate planning these days? Well,
we have had an estate tax exemption that has been in flux for the past 20 years. So it has made estate planning very, very exciting. Right. And so we have a joke of the estate planning exemption goes up, people want to plan. The estate planning exemption is going to want to go down. People are going to want to plan. The tax laws are going to change. So that's been very interesting in my line of work, because when I was in law school, the exemptions were still very low.
Yeah.
And affected a lot more people. And then they just kept getting higher and higher. And now the question is not if the estate tax exemption is going to go down, but when and by how much. Yeah. And the other interesting thing too for our practice area is, as the estate planning exemptions have gone so high, you start also thinking more about income tax planning than we did even 10 years ago when I first started. It's been really in the past 5 years or so that you're really focusing on income tax planning with respect to trusts than you are just solely on estate tax planning. So it's always new and exciting. Good for business.
Yeah, for sure. I was trying to remember, because I think I was just out of law school, or maybe it was at the end of my time in law school. Did we have a year off of no estate tax at all, right? In like 29 or 10? Yeah.
In 2010, there was no estate tax. And that was the year that I was taking the estate planning course at the University of Texas. So the entire year, we just pretended like it was 2009 and the laws that were around in 2009 applied, because there was no other way to do it. Yeah. So I was fortunate in that I skipped that year of being a baby attorney and not knowing what was going on.
Right.
But yeah, it was an interesting moment.
For sure. Yeah. I think that was the George Steinbrenner year. Also, like he died, the owner of the Yankees died during that year, and it was a big deal for sure. I mentioned earlier when we were talking about you kind of taking advantage of those connections and relationships that you had, friend of a friend in law school, to kind of find your way to estate planning. I feel like I talked to, both when I was working within the law school environment and students, as well as young lawyers now, that estate planning, because just of the nature of it right now and the way that it's practiced in the types of firms it's in, can be hard for young lawyers to find their way there if they want to do it, because it doesn't seem like as many opportunities as just say like general litigation or something else like of that sort or something like that. So what advice do you have for young lawyers who maybe are still trying to figure out which direction they want their career to go, or maybe still thinking about different practice areas, and if they want to explore or pursue estate planning, what are some thoughts that you might have for them?
So I'll tell you what I tell people when I interview them for summer associate positions, because I'm in charge of that at our firm. So I've interviewed a bunch of people. And so what I tell people is, if you are interested in estate planning and you want to get into like an estate planning boutique type firm, these types of places are really tax focused. And so you kind of have to be a tax nerd. And if you like tax, then that's great. Take as many tax courses as you can in law school and really try to, get as much from law school as you can for that. And then use that experience and that sort of drive and interest when you're interviewing with estate planning places, because the one thing that's going to jump off the page when I get any sort of resume or cover letter is, I'm very interested in tax. I'm taking all of these tax courses. That is going to be something that I'm like, okay, this is something that I'm looking for.
Okay, good. And so for someone then that's also maybe been out a year or two and is in a firm now, if they can get involved in whatever cases or areas their firm has that involve tax, either planning or tax avoidance or anything like that, that would be even if it's not quote unquote estate planning, but if it's tax related, that would be beneficial to see if their resume came across your desk and or something like that.
Yeah, if it's tax related, or even if it's in the corporate area, that corporate work translates very heavily into the type of estate planning that we do. We do a lot of estate planning with LLCs, with family limited partnerships. And so having a background in that is very, very helpful.
Awesome. Well, cool. And I mentioned earlier, I did want to ask you just briefly about how COVID has been impacting your practice and your firm in recent days. I always like to just give a little bit of a date reference because things change so much. And so it's March 4th as we're talking 2021. Vaccines are rolling out. Hopefully we're getting to the other side of this thing. But as it has developed here more recently, what's sort of the nature of things for you guys right now as it relates to COVID?
Well, so when COVID happened last year, we sort of shut everything down. We weren't really doing any will executions, which is a huge part of what we do with our clients, because you can write an estate plan unless it's properly executed. It's a piece of paper.
Right.
So that was something that we really struggled with a lot, on how do we get clients in and get them executed in a manner that comports with what the law requires, which is original ink signatures, wet signatures, two witnesses and a notary, all in the same line of sight. Yeah. So one of the things that we really struggle with is, how do we do that and keep everyone safe? So what we've been doing at our firm, in our office building, there's a conference room on the first floor that we can use. And so we do all of our will executions in there. And clients come in, they're not allowed to ask any questions during the will execution conference. All questions have to be asked. Any changes have to be asked ahead of time, which is a drastic change from what we typically do. We usually have, a 30, 45-minute meeting, go over all questions, maybe make some last-minute changes, and then everyone comes in and we sign up the documents. So that's been really minimized. And so it was just a question of how do we allow for that and keeping people safe. Everything else we've moved to Zoom or phones. All of our hearings since, last April or May, whenever the courts opened back up, have been on Zoom. And as far as I am aware, the short, easy, uncontested probate hearings will continue to have a Zoom option. Yeah. And, you can do, it's not the same as meeting in person when you meet with clients over Zoom or on the phone, but it's about as close as you can get. So.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I can only imagine that's been a challenge. And, it causes me to think too about how I feel like just in recent years, maybe the last 5, it seems that, the technology around signatures like DocuSign and so forth has certainly taken hold in a lot of different areas, signing like, I closed on a house a few years ago and did it all, I think, through DocuSign. And I know a lot of other industries as well. Do you see anything like that? I know you're joking about having the ink wet signatures and everybody there in line of sight. No. Nothing at all. We're not going anywhere near there.
No, unfortunately. So, people ask me this all the time, and unfortunately the laws are very strict. And I think the legislature too is very concerned with, it's a will, specifically with a will and a financial power of attorney. Those are really big documents. Like, those are very, very powerful documents. And most financial institutions don't really like relying on powers of attorney as it is. So I don't see that changing. For wills, their original ink signature, two witnesses and a notary, is very, you just can't get around that. So I don't see that really changing in the near future.
Yeah. Well, switching gears a little bit, as you maybe look back on your first few years in practice, what's something that you learned at that time that turned out to be a really great piece of advice that has really guided you and helped you become the lawyer that you are today, that you would want to maybe pass along to those that are listening?
So this is a funny way of saying it. If you send a document to a client, they're not going to know whether or not, the tax apportionment clause is wrong or anything technical like that. They're going to notice if their name is misspelled. So attention to detail is so important.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say that's something that I didn't know going in, but when you have a ping back of, hey, there's a typo here, there's a typo there, enough times, you just, start really paying even more attention to it. So I'm not the best attention to detail person. This is something that I had to work on.
Right.
That's one of the things that I wish I knew. Know your own faults when you get into practice and figure out how to fix them. But the other thing too is, as a young attorney, we're all, a lot of us, I guess, are perfectionists. You don't go through high school, college, and get into a good law school without being a high achiever. And so it's really difficult for a lot of us, perhaps, to start off in something and it's so new and you don't know what you're doing and you just feel so uncomfortable and you're like, I'm screwing everything up. I'm going to get fired. And the answer to that is, and this is what I tell young attorneys all of the time, is no one's expecting you to be perfect. You're not supposed to know the substance. Your job here for the first 3 years is to learn and to not have typos and to give me a work product that I can take and, make some minor changes on things that I know about that you don't know about and send it on to the client. That's what your job is. Your job isn't to deliver something that's perfect in every sense of the word, because it's just not going to be. And so I think knowing that's one of the things that I know now that I really wish I knew back then. Yeah.
Well, and it's, I'm glad you mentioned that, because something that we talk a lot about here, and I'm working on another episode right now, kind of curating some of the most common pieces of advice that have been given here over the last year. And one of them has been turning over to your partner or the senior associate, whoever assigned you the work that could be filed or could be sent to the client. And again, kind of withstanding some things that you might know of that they don't or whatever, but in terms of the typos, in terms of the grammar, in terms of the, justification and everything else, style, things that you do have control over and you can make sure are correct. And that just seems to be something that is not a given for sure among all of us lawyers out there getting started in practice. And so first drafts tend to be turned in and they're still first drafts. And that's it's kind of echoes what you're saying. And I think it bears repeating that that's an expectation that is easily met, I think, or should be able to be met. But just seems to, I don't know, be something that continues to be an issue.
Yeah. And I think part of the thing too is, and my husband is also an attorney. He has a different path than me. He's in big law and corporate practice. And so we talk a lot about, what he's seeing with the young attorneys at his firm and what we're seeing with the young attorneys at ours. And one of the things that he talks about a lot is, everyone is so eager to turn a document really quickly. Yeah. And you're not going to get brownie points for doing something quickly if it's wrong. Right. You're going to get a lot of brownie points for take the extra hour or two and make sure that it's as perfect as you can get it and then turn it in. That's going to impress someone. Being quick and doing a sloppy job no one's going to be impressed by that. So that's, I think it comes from a place of wanting to show that you know what you're doing. So you're going to do it as quickly as possible and be like, here, I did my work. But that's, if it's sloppy, then it's not really going to impress.
Yeah, no, for sure. And kind of building on that, because I do think on the other side of the equation, lawyers can sometimes have, this goes to you were talking before about, tend to be overachievers and tend to want to make things that are perfect and that kind of thing. And that can lead to the other problem, which is taking so long on something, or maybe going down so many, rabbit trails, researching every little tangential issue that might be there when it's really probably not, for sure not going to be able to be billed, and also not really going to be that relevant. But so how do you, especially as a young lawyer that's just getting going and kind of not yet knowing their way through that kind of thing, how do you recommend people, figure out, okay, what's the appropriate, how long should this take? Or, or how many tangents should I go on, or traps should I run, that, are sort of maybe relevant, but probably not, that kind of thing.
So the way that I would approach it if it was someone at my firm is, let's just write an issues list. Here are the things that I think might come up. Let's talk about which ones should be explored. Because certainly, it really all depends on, it's so fact specific too, of, how much time and effort do you want to or need to spend on some project. This is maybe not completely on point, but I think it's analogous enough. One of the things that we do at our firm is we assist with preparation of gift tax returns. One of the big components of gift tax is the generation skipping tax allocation. And it's complicated because there's rules from before 2000, and then there's different rules after 2000, and you can get into this really big, complicated mess of a mixed inclusion ratio and trying to figure all of that out. And so the question often is, how much time do you need to spend determining what the mixed inclusion ratio is? Is there a way that you can say, it doesn't matter, this person has a total estate of $6 million or $4 million or $3 million, and the estate tax exemption is so high that this is never going to be an issue? Is it an issue? Is it not an issue? What is the likelihood of this being an issue? And how much time do we actually need to spend on determining the minute, amount? Is it, 0.8 or 0.7? Or are we just going to say it's completely non-exempt and we need to allocate to the whole thing, which is 9 times out of 10, probably the right answer, because it's not beneficial to the client and they're not going to pay for it. And it's very complicated. So that's sort of not really answering your question, I hear you. But I feel like it's analogous enough of.
Absolutely. So as you've worked both with associates as you were working your way up, and now, like you mentioned, you're overseeing interviewing and hiring and that type of thing for your firm as well. What do you see in young lawyers that really impresses you or impresses your colleagues? When you see a young lawyer doing something and you can identify as, okay, that's, they're on the right track. We like to see stuff like that. What's something that makes young lawyers stand out?
So specifically for someone who is already at our firm, one of the things that really stands out is when someone is a self-starter. For example, they don't know what is a mixed inclusion ratio? How do you calculate it? And then they go and try to figure it out on their own. There's nothing wrong with going to an attorney and asking questions. But if you go and say, I'm going to do some research, I'm going to find some articles on the Texas Bar website or on the B&A portfolios for GST tax and try to get a background knowledge of it, and then come and be able to have an intelligent discussion instead of saying, what does mixed inclusion ratio mean? You say, how is this actually applicable in real life and in your practice? And how do you actually go about calculating it? Because I sort of think I understand all of the background. So being a self-starter, doing your own research, if there's something that you don't understand, ask a question about it. There's nothing wrong with raising your hand and saying, I have no idea what you're talking about when you're talking about, some complicated tax concept. Trying to understand and asking those questions and having that initiative to learn is really impressive. And it's something that really I should do more often. If there's something that I don't know, to try to learn it myself, I just go ask someone down the hall to explain it to me. But, do as I say, not as I do.
Right. Of course. Yeah. Well, and that, that part about taking a little time up front to try and get at least some context or some fundamental understanding before kind of going and asking maybe for the full picture or the deeper dive into it. I do think that does go a long way. I've seen that quite a bit. And it doesn't mean, like you have to go necessarily try to learn the whole thing before, but like even just taking that extra, 30 minutes or an hour before you go ask someone to just kind of get a little bit more fundamental understanding so that you can at least maybe speak the language a little bit. I do think that can really be helpful and really makes for a more productive conversation with the person that you're going to ask for the help, because it's not like it's wasting time. It's actually probably saving it in the long term and making that conversation go quicker and not having to re-explain things or kind of re-educate from the beginning.
Yeah, and one of the ways that it sort of clicked for me is when I was told years ago as I was coming up, don't come into my office and ask me, how does this work? Come into my office and say, I think this is how it works. Is that right? Am I missing something? And it's a very minor turn of phrase, because you might come in kind of knowing how it works, but if you just ask, how does this work? The implication is that you don't know. But if you right, and you just teach me. But if it's hey, am I right? Am I wrong? What am I missing? It makes all of the difference when you are asking someone a question.
Yeah, that's really, really good. And by the way, for people listening, if you haven't checked out before, we do put all the notes from these episodes in blog posts that accompany this in the show notes as well in your app or whatever you're listening on. And so that phrase that we just heard is going to be there word for word so that you have it, because I think that's really, really good. Okay, so I do want to ask you about hiring. And so as you're looking at candidates, and let's start maybe just with the kind of initial phases or stages. So on documents, whether it be resumes, cover letters, anything else you might ask for, what are some things that you're really looking for there that stand out, both on the positive side and on the negative side, maybe to help screen out people that aren't a good fit?
So the first thing that pops up on the negative side is don't have any typos. That'll put you in the reject pile really quickly. But as far as positives, I did talk a lot about at the beginning of we want someone who's a tax nerd and who all of that. But more so, we are a fairly small firm still. We have 18 attorneys. You need to be sociable. You need to be able to get along with people. And, we don't want just someone who's in their office all day and has nothing to say or nothing to do and just wants to do their work. That might not be the case at other places, but at our place, we like to be very friendly. And so one of the things that I always like to see on resumes, at the bottom is, what other things do you enjoy doing? Traveling, reading, whatever. It's really good for conversation when you don't know what else to ask the person. Have something interesting on your resume that could spark a conversation, because, a resume sort of speaks for itself. A resume and transcript speaks for itself. But in an interview, we sort of want to make sure that we like you as a person and, that you're a good fit for our firm, and especially for us, that, you have some connection to Houston, because that's where we are, and that you're planning on staying here long term. Yeah.
And talk about that a little bit, because I think we probably haven't addressed it enough here in terms of location and how much of an issue that can be or not. When you're looking at, like you guys are in Houston, you're looking for maybe people that are interested in being there for the longer term. Is that something that you're wanting to see a very specific, like they either are from there or they went to school there, or if they're maybe not, maybe they grew up in a small town, went to a small, a different school, or maybe even from out of state, but they're looking for a place to be, and they can kind of, articulate that in an interview, that why they want to be there. How hard of a line are you drawing on that to determine whether or not, the location thing is important?
it's not a hard line. Really, what we're trying to make sure is that whoever we hire is, because it takes effort to train up an attorney. We're hiring someone who's brand new, straight out of law school. They don't know anything. We don't want to spend 3 years training them for them to decide to move somewhere else because of whatever reason. I mean, people move, right? There's certainly things that you can't predict, but things that are, you want to make sure you have a really strong reason of why you want to be in Houston. For example, saying my boyfriend is getting a job in Houston, so I'm looking in Houston is not a great reason. That's going to raise some red flags. Because if you want to move because of some boy who's going here, what makes us think that you're going to, not move because of later? And there's definitely ways of including that in your answer without making it the focal point. For example, you could say, I really want to live in a big city, and Houston has such a great culture, and, it meets all of these other criteria. And by the way, it's looking like maybe my boyfriend's going to also get a job here, but my main reason for wanting to be in Houston is X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
So you can finagle it that way. The idea is you're trying to convince me that you're not just going to leave in 3 years.
Yeah.
And you're going to stay here long term.
Yeah. And I wanted to spend a little extra minute on that just because I think that sometimes candidates forget or don't think about how that you as the interviewer and the firm as the potential hiring firm are trying to figure out how serious this person is about wanting to be here, and not just have a job, but have this particular job, meaning this role in this firm and in this city. And you have to kind of check all those boxes. And so if you don't have, if Houston's not, for you guys, just as an example, if Houston's not kind of peppered throughout the resume because of where you went to school, where you're from, or where you're working now, or whatever, and you don't have, you got to overcome that hurdle, because otherwise it's just a question that's out there. And so it is no different than if you don't have tax on your resume, you're gonna have to figure out how to get across that hurdle. And sometimes I think the location piece gets forgotten. We joke sometimes about how, okay, so maybe if it's Austin, everyone just assumes everyone wants to be in Austin. And so that's just one of those things that whatever. And we're more concerned about, why do you want to be here? Is it just to go out on 6th Street every night, or do you actually want to work? But for every other place, I mean, whether it's Houston, Dallas, or any of the other cities or whatever, no, we want to find out, here in Waco with me, why do you want to be here? And how long can we expect to keep you here?
Right. And that's not certainly the case for every law firm. I mean, in big law, for example, I don't think they really care. They just sort of expect you to come in, churn out some work, and maybe in 3 years you're going to leave. And that's fine, because they have a deep bench of people who are going to continue in and fill in your place. That is not how we as a smaller boutique firm function. If someone leaves, it affects all of us. So we want to keep you.
That's right. And so I think there's definitely a big firm, small firm difference there. And then I also think even among small and mid-sized firms, it can be dependent upon whether there's an attitude of, we want people that are eventually going to become our partners, or maybe we do have a model where we really have our 3 or 5 or 7 partners, and we are just going to have associates until they leave. And so maybe it's not as important. And so it can depend. But I still, I'm glad we've talked about it, because I think it's not talked about enough, and it can trip people up. And it's a real simple one, really, if if people take the time. Okay, we're winding up our time. And so the last thing I want to ask you about that I neglected to earlier is developing your own clientele and your own book of business. It's something I hear quite a bit from young lawyers that are, they're in that first few years of practice, and they're trying to become the best lawyer that they can. And at the same time, they're, it can come at them fast in terms of, okay, at year 6, 7, 8, maybe I could be up for partner, but how do I, have that book of business that can help me get that? Or how do I do that while I'm trying to just spend all my time, becoming a lawyer and all of that? So how do you advise lawyers that are thinking through some of the challenges around developing business while they're kind of still getting up to speed?
I'm probably the worst person to ask that, because our firm has been around for so many years, and we just naturally have our tagline is from one generation to the next. So, we've helped the grandparent generation with their planning, and then we've done their estates. And then we helped the parent generation with their planning, and then we've done their estates. And then we've helped the child generation maybe now with their planning. And, we have 10 shareholders, and we have it's probably 5 or 6 on the estate planning side, and we've got 5 associates. So it's really easy for the shareholders on the estate planning side to pass work down and say, oh, you don't need me to do this simple planning project for you. Here, Jovana or whoever else at our firm, you can handle it. So I've just been sort of handed over a whole bunch of clients over the years just by working on their parents' estates, and they need someone to do their planning, so they can come to me because they've liked me. So I've been very fortunate in that, but it's all about making connections. So the other place that we get a lot of business from at our firm is with CPAs, financial advisors,
of course,
and all of that. And so for me, I'm a big believer in relationships developing organically. So with CPAs, we work on them with clients' estates. You get to know them through that process, and then they will, they know what your capabilities are. They know who their clients are, and if it's a good fit, they refer to you. So like I said, I'm not the greatest person because I've had a really easy time developing the business. But for a substantive thing that I would say is speaking has been a really great way to get your name out there and have people know who you are. So I speak, I don't want to say rather frequently, but it's been every year for the past few years at the Texas State Bar seminars. So I spoke at the Advanced Estate Planning and Probate Seminar last year and speaking at it again this year. And once you get into that speaking world, people just tend to know who you are, and then they tend to ask you to speak, and then people will reach out to you and say, hey, I heard you speak on such and such. Can you help me with this? The other place, also tangential to speaking, if you have sometimes financial advisors will do webcasts about a topic. So I spoke about the Secure Act, and that's gotten me a handful of new clients. So just like that, building and maintaining relationships, and just knowing that it comes organically. And at our firm, having a book of business wasn't one of the check marks that you had to get to become a shareholder. But it definitely helps.
Yeah. Well, and the practicals that you mentioned there at the end are great. And I think, certainly, lawyers that take advantage of those opportunities will only increase the amount of potential business they could develop from that. But I don't just want to sleep on the first part, which is when you have a partner or partners that are very generous with giving over their clients and allowing you to take on what at whatever level you are, the projects that you can do. I mean, that's a big deal too. And so I think that's something that as young associates, you can kind of start to see, okay, who are the partners in the firm that are kind of, being very generous and putting you in front of clients a lot, that kind of thing. I mean, I think that can matter too. And I think that's a good thing to keep an eye out on for sure.
Yeah, I think so.
Is there anything before we do our rapid fire questions here at the end? Is there anything that we haven't touched on yet that you'd want to share?
I think we've been fairly comprehensive. So no, I'm ready. I'm in the hot seat.
Yes. Okay. Hot seat for the for the rapid fires. Okay. Here we go. Name the one trait or characteristic that you most want to see in an associate.
Someone who's detail oriented. We touched on this before.
Yes. All right. What habit has been key to your success?
Keeping my time as I go. There's nothing worse than having to do all of your time all at once at the end of a week and trying to figure out what you've done. Doing it as you go is life-changing.
Absolutely. Well, it'll be interesting to see if the third question relates to the second. Your favorite app or productivity tool?
Oh gosh. I don't know if I would call it my favorite, but we recently transitioned our timekeeping software to the cloud, and it's been amazing for productivity.
Yeah, no, timekeeping is one of the most popular ones to mention on that. So that's not a surprise. Your favorite social distancing activity?
Having a socially distanced picnic in the park with my dog and my girlfriends.
There you go. I like it. All right. And then last, and of course, the most important, your favorite legal movie.
Oh, God. I saw this on the preparations and my mind totally went blank on it. I would have to, if I had to pick one, the one that's coming to mind is either The Paper Chase, because just it's so like iconic, but then also Legally Blonde because how could you not?
Of course, both great selections, and those are good choices. Yeah, Legally Blonde is a favorite for sure. The Paper Chase, actually, our contracts professor made the entire class watch it one night, the first week of law school in year one, and so that's been ingrained in my head since then, for sure. Good one as well. All right, well. Jovana, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. We really appreciate it and wish you all the best.
Thanks. This has been fun.
All right. My thanks again to Jovana Popovich for joining us on the show today. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider doing two things? Would you subscribe so you don't miss an episode? And then would you rate and review the podcast in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen? If you have suggestions or thoughts about the show, or if I could help you in any way, please email me directly at daniel@varsitysearch.com. Also, don't forget, if you're interested in any of the opportunities that we mentioned earlier, or you might just want to visit in more general terms about what opportunities might be out there and some things to be thinking about if you're looking to potentially make a change, please get in touch with me. Would love to visit with you about any of that. All right, that's it for today's episode of Lone Star Lawyers. Thanks again so much to each of you for listening. I'm Daniel Hare with Varsity Search, and we'll talk with you next time.